The coat was older than Yuna. It was older than her mother too. Her grandmother had worn it first, back when Korea was burning and the world was full of fire. It was a long, dark coat, heavy and plain, made of wool so thick it could stop the wind dead. There were stitches everywhere, some neat, some rough, some made with thread that did not match. Every stitch was a repair. Every repair was a memory of something that had tried to destroy it and failed. Yuna wore it the day she arrived at Station Halcyon. Station Halcyon was the largest structure humanity had ever seen. It floated in the empty black space around a dead star, a city made of metal and light, home to no one and open to everyone. Thousands of species came here to trade, to talk, and to decide the future of the galaxy. The Galactic Trade Summit happened once every 10 years, and every species that mattered sent their best. Earth sent Yuna. She was the junior diplomatic attaché, the lowest rank a person could hold and still be allowed into the Grand Atrium. She was 31 years old. She had been a military engineer before she became a diplomat, and she still carried herself like someone who knew how machines worked better than people. She was quiet. She was small. She wore her grandmother's coat and kept her hands in its pockets. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for 40 years. That sounded like a long time, but it was nothing compared to species that had been traveling between stars for 10,000 years. Humans had no seat on the Galactic Council. They had no real power. They were allowed to attend the summit the way a child is allowed to sit at the adult table, present, but not expected to speak. Jisoo met her at the docking port. Jisoo was her best friend and Earth's communications officer on the station. She was tall and loud and always moving, the exact opposite of Yuna. She grabbed Yuna's bag and started talking before Yuna had even stepped off the shuttle. "You should see this place," Jisoo said, pulling her through the corridors. "It is huge. The ceilings are so high I got dizzy looking up. And the aliens, there are so many kinds. Some of them are beautiful. Some of them smell terrible. One of them tried to eat my badge." Yuna smiled, but said nothing. She was looking at everything. The station was full of light and noise and movement. Species she had only seen in briefing files walked past her. Tall ones, short ones, ones made of crystal, ones that floated in liquid spheres. She felt very small and very far from home. The opening ceremony was held in the Grand Atrium, a space so large it had its own weather. Clouds formed near the ceiling. Delegates from hundreds of worlds gathered in their finest clothing and armor and shells. Yuna stood near the back, her coat buttoned to her throat, her hands still in her pockets. That was when the Vren arrived. The Vren were enormous. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, with gray armored skin and 4 arms that ended in hands like stone. Their eyes were small and red and set deep in their skulls. They moved in a tight formation, their footsteps shaking the floor. Every other species stepped aside when they walked. Some bowed, some looked away. Nobody blocked their path. The Vren were the most powerful species in the galaxy. They held 6 seats on the council. Their fleet was the largest ever assembled. They had conquered 11 species and adopted 30 more. When they entered a room, the room belonged to them. High Commander Okuda led the procession. He was the tallest Vren Yuna had ever seen. Decorated with scars he wore like medals. He walked with the slow, heavy certainty of someone who had never been told no. Yuna did not see them coming. She was reading something on her datapad when the crowd shifted, and suddenly the Vren processional path was right in front of her. She looked up and found herself standing directly in Okuda's way. The atrium went silent. Thousands of beings stopped talking at once. The silence was so heavy it felt like pressure on Yuna's skin. Okuda looked down at her. His red eyes moved from her face to her coat to her small human hands. His upper lip curled. Then he spat on her. The glob hid her coat just below the collar. It was thick and hot and slightly acidic. The wool hissed faintly. A tiny curl of smoke rose from the stain. Someone in the crowd made a sound that might have been laughter. Others looked away. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Yuna felt the heat of it through the fabric. She smelled the sharp chemical burn. She looked down at the stain spreading on her grandmother's coat, the coat that had survived a war, that had been stitched back together 100 times, that was the last thing her grandmother had touched before she died. She did not flinch. She did not speak. She did not cry. She reached up with her sleeve and wiped the stain as best she could. Then she stepped aside, bowed her head slightly, and let the Vren pass. Okuda did not look back. He did not need to. The message was delivered. The galaxy saw it clearly. Humans were nothing, not even worth a second glance. The ceremony continued as if nothing had happened. Later, in the small, cramped quarters assigned to the human delegation, Jisoo was pacing like a trapped animal. Her face was red. Her fists were clenched. "We have to file a protest," she said. "We have to report this." "That was a deliberate act of Jisoo," Yuna said quietly. "Humiliation in front of every species in the galaxy, and we just stood there, and Jisoo." Jisoo stopped. She looked at Yuna, who was sitting on her bunk, carefully examining the burn mark on the coat. The acid had eaten through the top layer of wool, leaving a dark, rough patch the size of a fist. "My grandmother survived worse," Yuna said. She ran her finger along the edge of the burn. "So will this coat. So will we." Jisoo opened her mouth to argue, but something in Yuna's face stopped her. It was not sadness. It was not anger. It was something older and harder than both. Jisoo sat down and said nothing more. 600 light-years away, in Earth's orbital command station, Admiral Dohan watched the security footage of the incident for the third time. He was a still, patient man with silver hair and eyes that gave away nothing. He watched Yuna wipe the stain. He watched her bow. Then he picked up a secure communicator and made a single encrypted call to a frequency that officially did not exist. "Wake Tahoe," he said, "nothing more." Deep behind Jupiter's largest moon, in a shipyard that appeared on no map and no record, lights began to flicker on. They spread across a vast dark hangar, revealing row after row of warships, dormant, silent, waiting. Dust floated in the air like snow. In a small room at the heart of the shipyard, a man sat up from a cot. He was lean and sharp-faced, with the kind of calm that comes from being ready for a very long time. He picked up his datapad and read the 3-word message on the screen. They touched her. Tahoe read it twice. Then he stood, pulled on his boots, and walked into the hangar. The ships towered above him like sleeping giants. He placed his hand on the cold hull of the nearest one, and felt the metal hum under his palm, as if the ship remembered what it was built for. He whispered a single word: soon. The teeth behind the smile. The days that followed were worse than the spitting. Yuna had expected it. She had studied the Vren before coming to Station Halcyon. She knew how they operated. They did not simply defeat their enemies. They broke them slowly, publicly, and completely. The spit on her coat was not an insult. It was the beginning of a campaign. On the second day of the summit, the human delegation presented a trade proposal. It was a modest thing, an offer to share Earth's agricultural technology with 3 smaller species in exchange for mineral rights on an unclaimed asteroid belt. Yuna had spent 4 months writing it. It was fair, balanced, and carefully worded to offend no one. Okuda killed it in 6 seconds. He stood in the council chamber, raised one of his 4 massive arms, and declared the proposal unfit for consideration by civilized species. He did not explain why. When the Vren said something was unfit, it was unfit. The proposal was removed from the schedule without a vote. On the third day, a Vren officer publicly referred to humans as soft-skinned vermin during a panel on galactic security. The audience laughed. Some of the smaller species laughed loudest, desperate to show the Vren they were on the right side. On the fourth day, the human delegation's access to the station's main communication hub was downgraded to the lowest priority. Their messages to Earth now took 6 hours instead of 6 minutes. When Jisoo complained, the station administrator, a thin, nervous being from a species that owed its survival to Vren protection, told her it was a technical issue and looked at the floor. Yuna bore all of it without expression. She attended every session. She sat in her assigned seat, the smallest, furthest from the center. She listened. She took notes. She wore her grandmother's coat, with its acid stain visible to everyone, and she did not hide it. This confused the Vren. They were used to fear. They were used to anger. They were used to begging. Yuna gave them nothing, and nothing was the one thing they did not know how to answer. "She is broken already," Okuda told his officers one evening, watching the security feeds from the human quarters. "Look at her. She does not even fight." But Okuda was wrong. Yuna was not broken. She was listening. On the fifth night, Hiram contacted them. Hiram was 26 years old, small and sharp and very good with data. She worked in Earth's intelligence division, buried in a basement office that smelled like old coffee and burned circuits. She had been monitoring Vren communications since the summit began, and on the fifth night, she cracked their encryption. What she found made her hands shake. She sent the decoded files to Jisoo on a secure channel. Jisoo read them, went pale, and brought them to Yuna. "They are going to call a subjugation vote," Jisoo said. Her voice was barely a whisper, as if saying it louder would make it more real. Yuna read the files. A subjugation vote was an old galactic law, rarely used, almost forgotten. It allowed the Council to reclassify a species as dependent, placing them under the control and authority of a sponsoring species. The dependent species would lose all independent trade rights, all military sovereignty, and all voting power. They would become, in every way that mattered, property. The Vren planned to call this vote on the final day of the summit. They had already begun pressuring smaller species to support it. The decoded messages showed threats, bribes, and promises. Vote for subjugation, and the Vren would protect you. Vote against it, and the Vren would remember. "They have enough votes," Jisoo said. "Not by much, but enough." Yuna stared at the files for a long time. Then she closed her datapad, went to her bunk, and called her brother. The connection took time. The signal had to travel through 3 relay stations and 2 encrypted reroutes before it reached the hidden shipyard behind Jupiter's moon. When Taeho's face appeared on the screen, he looked the same as always, calm, steady, and slightly tired in the way that people look when they have been waiting for something important. "I know," he said before Yuna could speak. "Hiram sent me the files too. Then you know what they are planning." "I do." Through the thin walls of her quarters, she could hear the hum of Station Halcyon. 10,000 species living and breathing and deciding the future of the galaxy. "I do not want a war, Taeho," she said. "Neither do I." "Then what do we do?" Taeho leaned forward. The light from his datapad cast deep shadows on his face. "Do you remember what Halmoni said about the coat?" Yuna closed her eyes. She could hear her grandmother's voice as clearly as if the old woman were sitting beside her. She said every stitch was a scar that refused to become a grave. "That is right," Taeho said. "We do not start wars, Yuna. But we finish them. And sometimes finishing a war means showing up so completely that the war never starts." He told her about the Iron Seventh. 7 carrier groups, each one named after a mountain on Earth: Halasan, Serok, Jiri, Taebek, Bukhan, Guanak, Dobong. Each one crewed by volunteers who had trained in secret for 15 years. each one carrying enough firepower to crack a moon in half. They were Earth's hidden hand, built in silence, maintained in darkness, and never spoken of in any official record. "How long?" Yuna asked. 3 days. We will be in position before the vote." Yuna nodded. "Do not fire first." "I never do." They looked at each other through the screen, brother and sister, separated by 600 light-years and the weight of everything that was coming. "Be careful," Yuna said. "Be patient," Taeho replied. The connection ended. The next morning, Jisoo began her own mission. She knew the Vren were watching the human quarters. Every conversation was monitored. Every movement was tracked. So she used this against them. She began feeding the Vren exactly what they wanted to hear. She made calls to Earth on unsecured channels, letting her voice crack with false worry. She left her datapad unlocked where Vren surveillance drones could read it. And on the screen were fake messages. Arguments between human officials, panicked requests for instructions, desperate pleas for help that would never come. She played the part of a defeated species so well that even Yuna was impressed. "You are a terrible liar in real life," Yuna told her. "That is because in real life I do not have motivation," Jisoo said with a grin. "Now I do." The Vren intercepted every message. Okuda read every word. And with each passing day, he became more confident. The humans were collapsing. They had no plan. They had no fleet. They had nothing but a quiet woman in a burned coat, and a loud woman making desperate phone calls. On the 6th night, Okuda held a dinner for his officers in the Vren section of the station. He raised a glass of something thick and dark, and made a toast. "To the end of the human question," he said. "In 2 days, they will belong to us." His officers cheered. His lieutenant, a younger Vren named Doko, leaned forward and asked a question that had been bothering him. "High Commander, what happens if they resist?" Okuda laughed. It was a deep, grinding sound, like rocks being crushed. "What resistance? They sent a girl in a torn coat." The officers laughed with him. The sound filled the room and spilled out into the corridor. 700 light-years away, the Iron Seventh moved through the darkness of space in perfect silence. 7 carrier groups, 49 warships, 12,000 crew. They flew without running lights, without broadcasting signals, without leaving a single trace. At the front of the formation, aboard the flagship Baekdu, Taeho stood on the bridge and watched the stars. His officers worked quietly around him. Nobody spoke unless necessary. The only sound was the low hum of the engines. Taeho reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was old and creased, and showed a young woman in a dark coat, standing on a hillside in Korea, smiling at the camera. His grandmother. Yuna looked just like her. He placed the photograph on the console in front of him and gave a single order. "All ships, full speed." The Iron Seventh surged forward, and the stars stretched into lines of light. The vote and the veil. Okuda called the vote 1 day early. It was a trick, and a simple one. By moving the subjugation vote forward, he caught dozens of delegations off guard. Representatives who had planned to argue against it were not ready. Those who might have organized opposition had no time. The announcement came at dawn, station time, and by the time most species had finished their morning rituals, the grand chamber was already filling. Yuna was ready. She had not slept. She had been sitting on her bunk since midnight, her grandmother's coat draped across her knees, running her fingers along the stitches, the way a musician runs fingers along an instrument before a performance. Jisoo had fallen asleep at her desk with her face on her datapad. Yuna woke her gently. "It is today," Yuna said. Jisoo looked at her with tired, angry eyes. "How do you know?" "Because it is what I would do if I wanted to make sure no one could stop me." They dressed. They walked to the grand chamber. The corridors were full of confused, rushing delegates who had just received the notice. Some looked frightened. Some looked relieved that it would be over soon. A few looked at Yuna as she passed, and in their eyes she saw something that might have been pity or might have been shame. The grand chamber was an enormous circular room with tiered seating that rose up like the inside of a bowl. At the center was a raised platform where speakers could address the full assembly. Above it, a dome of transparent material showed the stars outside, cold, distant, and indifferent. Yuna took her seat in the highest tier, at the very back. Jisoo sat beside her. Below them, hundreds of species arranged themselves by rank and power. The Vren occupied the front rows, their gray bulk filling the seats like boulders in a river. Okuda sat at the very center of the front row, his 4 arms resting on the armrests of a chair that had been specially built for his size. He looked comfortable. He looked certain. The session began with formalities. The station's neutral moderator, a small floating being made of light and sound, read out the motion in 12 languages. The subjugation vote, once activated, required a simple majority to pass. The target species would be named, the evidence for their need for guidance would be presented, and the vote would proceed. Okuda rose to speak. He was a powerful speaker, Yuna had to admit. His voice was deep and resonant, and it filled the chamber without amplification. He spoke for 20 minutes. He talked about the natural order of the galaxy, how some species were born to lead and others were born to follow. He talked about history, about the Vren's long record of guiding lesser civilizations towards stability and purpose. He talked about responsibility and duty and the burden of the strong. Then he turned toward Yuna. "Look at them," he said, raising one arm to point at the human delegation. 40 years among the stars, and what have they achieved? They cannot defend their own borders. They cannot protect their own people. They cannot even protect their own clothing. The chamber laughed. Not all of them, not loudly, but enough. Humanity needs guidance, Okuda continued. They need structure. They need purpose. And we, the Vren, are willing to provide it. This is not conquest. This is kindness. This is a hand extended to a child who is lost in the dark. He sat down to applause from his allies. The moderator asked if the target species wished to respond. The chamber turned to look at Yuna. She could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes. Alien eyes, human eyes, the cold glass eyes of cameras that would broadcast this moment to every corner of the galaxy. She stood. The walk from the top tier to the central platform was long. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. She was small, smaller than almost every other being in the room. Her coat hung from her shoulders, the acid stain dark and visible against the wool. She looked like exactly what Okuda had described, a child lost in the dark. She reached the platform. She did not adjust the microphone. She did not clear her throat. She simply began. "This coat belonged to my grandmother," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the chamber's acoustics carried it to every seat. She wore it for the first time in 1951, during a war that killed millions of people on my planet. She was 17 years old. She had no home. She had no food. She had this coat. Even the Vren were listening. Over the next 70 years, this coat was burned, torn, soaked in blood, and left in the rain. It was stepped on. It was thrown away. Someone used it as a rag to clean a floor. My grandmother found it each time, and each time she stitched it back together. She used whatever thread she could find. Sometimes it matched, sometimes it did not. She did not care about beauty. She cared about survival. Yuna paused. She touched the acid stain on her coat. 6 days ago, your High Commander spat on this coat. His saliva burned through the top layer of wool. It left a mark that I cannot remove. It is the newest wound on a very old piece of clothing. She looked directly at Okuda. He stared back at her with his small red eyes, his expression flat and unreadable. "You think this stain proves that we are weak," Yuna said. "You think the fact that I did not fight back proves that we are broken. You are wrong." Her voice did not rise, it did not shake. It remained exactly as it had been from the beginning, quiet, clear, and steady as stone. "Humans do not show their anger the way you do. We do not roar. We do not pound our chests. We do not spit on those weaker than us to feel strong. We are quiet. We are patient. We watch. We learn. And when we finally move, we move completely." She looked out at the chamber, at the hundreds of species watching her, waiting, judging. "You mistake our silence for surrender. You mistake our patience for weakness. But I want you to understand something, all of you. Humans do not bare their teeth to warn you. We bare them when it is already too late for you to run." The chamber was absolutely silent. "Vote however you wish," Yuna said. "But know this, the coat survived. It always survives, and so do we." Jisu's eyes were shining with tears she was too proud to wipe away. The vote proceeded. It was close. Species that had been bullied by the Vren voted yes with their eyes on the floor. Species that feared the Vren voted yes with trembling hands. A few brave ones voted no, the ones who had nothing left to lose, or the ones who remembered what it felt like to be the small one in the room. The final count was 347 to 302. The subjugation vote passed. A sound moved through the chamber, a low murmur of relief from the Vren side, a stunned silence from everywhere else. Okuda allowed himself a small, tight smile. It was done. Humanity now belonged to the Vren, legally, officially, completely. Yuna nodded once. Then she did something that nobody expected. She stood, unbuttoned her grandmother's coat, removed it carefully, folded it with the precision of someone handling something sacred, and placed it on her chair. Beneath the coat, she wore a simple black uniform. On her wrist was a small device, no bigger than a watch. She tapped it once. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then every screen on Station Halcyon went dark. Every display, every holographic advertisement, every navigation panel, every communication monitor, all of them flickered, died, and came back to life, showing the same image. 7 fleet formations, massive, human, dropping out of hyperspace in perfect synchronization around Station Halcyon. The ships were enormous, carrier groups the size of small cities, bristling with weapons that gleamed in the starlight. They appeared out of nothing, like wolves stepping out of a fog. The Iron 7th had arrived. The chamber erupted. Delegates leaped from their seats. Alarms screamed through the station. The Vren officers reached for weapons that were not allowed inside the chamber. Okuda's smile vanished so fast, it was as if it had never existed. On every screen, a message appeared in every known language. 2 words, repeated in calm white text against the black of space. Iron 7th. Jisu grabbed Yuna's arm. Her hand was shaking, but her voice was steady. Was the speech for them, or for us? Yuna looked at the chaos below, at the Vren scrambling, at the smaller species frozen in their seats, at the stars outside the dome, where the Iron 7th hung, in silent, terrible formation. "It was the last kind thing I could do," she said. "Iron 7th. The voice came through every speaker on Station Halcyon at the same time. It was calm. It was polite. It was the kind of voice that a man uses when he is so certain of his power that he does not need to raise it. "This is Commander Teho of the Earth vessel Bekdu, flagship of the Iron 7th Rapid Response Fleet. I am broadcasting on all frequencies." In the Grand Chamber, every being stopped moving. The alarms had been silenced. The screens still showed the fleet, 7 carrier groups arranged in a perfect ring around the station. close enough to see individual ships, far enough to show the full, terrifying scale of what had arrived. Taeho continued. 12 minutes ago, this assembly passed a subjugation vote against the species known as humanity. Under Galactic Emergency Statute 9, Article 14, any sovereign species has the right to challenge a subjugation ruling through military presence when evidence of coercion is documented. He paused. The silence in the chamber was so deep that Yuna could hear her own heartbeat. We have that evidence. Intercepted communications show that no fewer than 43 species were threatened, bribed, or intimidated into supporting this vote. The vote is therefore challenged. It will be suspended pending review, or it will be enforced. Another pause. I strongly recommend the first option. In the front row, Okuda was already on his feet, shouting into his communicator. His fleet, 32 warships stationed in a defensive formation on the far side of the station, was scrambling to reposition. Vren officers barked orders. Shields were raised. Weapons were charged. The Vren fleet had been positioned for intimidation, not combat. They were spread wide, designed to look impressive from the station's observation windows. The Iron 7th had arrived in a tight tactical ring, each carrier group covering the others, each one already in firing position. The humans had come ready. The Vren had come to pose. Okuda opened a direct channel to Taeho. His voice was rough with fury. You dare threaten the Vren Dominion? You dare bring warships to a diplomatic summit? This is an act of war, human. You will be destroyed. Taeho's response was immediate and perfectly calm. High Commander, I have not threatened anyone. I have stated a legal right under galactic law. My ships have not fired. My weapons are cold. I am here to talk. But I understand that words are sometimes not enough, so I would like to offer a small demonstration of our willingness to have this conversation. He gave a single order. Halasan, you are free. The destroyer Halasan was the smallest ship in the Iron 7th. It was fast and narrow, built like a blade. It broke formation and accelerated toward the Vren fleet with a speed that made the tactical officers on Station Halcyon drop their instruments. The Vren fleet reacted instantly. 3 cruisers turned their guns toward the approaching ship. Shield generators hummed at full power. Targeting systems locked on. Halasan did not slow down. It did not change course. It flew directly into the heart of the Vren formation. What happened next took 11 seconds. Halasan threaded between the 3 cruisers like a needle through cloth. It passed so close to the first cruiser that the hull cameras captured the reflection of the Vren bridge crew, staring out their windows in shock. As it passed, it released 3 electromagnetic pulses, tight, focused, and perfectly calibrated. Each pulse hit a different cruiser's shield generator with surgical accuracy. The shields did not explode. They did not shatter. They simply turned off, like someone had flipped a switch. 3 Vren cruisers, the pride of their fleet, sat naked in space with no shields and no way to restore them for hours. Halasan completed its pass, curved in a smooth arc, and returned to formation. It had not fired a single weapon. It had not scratched a single hull. It had simply reached into the Vren fleet's chest and stopped its heart. Total elapsed time, 11 seconds. Not the silence of awe. The silence of beings who had just realized they were standing in the presence of something they did not understand. Taeho broadcast again. That was a greeting. We have 6 more mountains to introduce. In the chamber, Yuna stood motionless. She had not moved since the fleet arrived. Her eyes were on the screens, watching the Vren fleet drift in confusion, watching the 3 cruisers sitting dark and exposed, watching the Halasan slide back into formation as if it had done nothing more difficult than stretching its legs. Jisoo was gripping the armrest of her seat so hard, her fingers were white. Did we just— No, Yuna said. We did not do anything yet. That was Taeho being polite. Okuda stared at the tactical display on his communicator. The 3 cruisers were flagged in red, shields down, systems compromised, completely vulnerable. His fleet still had 29 functional warships, but the formation was shaken. His officers were speaking too fast, their voices higher than they should have been. He turned to his lieutenant, Doko. "What is this fleet? Where did it come from? Our intelligence showed no human military buildup of this scale." Doko's face was pale gray, which for a Vren was the color of fear. "I do not know, High Commander. Our scans show 49 warships, 12 support vessels, and an unknown number of fighter craft. Their technology does not fully match anything in our records." "How is that possible?" "It appears they have been building in secret for years." Okuda smashed his fist against the console, the metal dented under his hand. 600 light-years away, Admiral Dohan sat in Earth's orbital command station, watching the situation unfold on a wall of screens. He had been calm since the day the Iron Seventh was first conceived. 15 years ago, when a young officer named Teho had stood in his office and said, "Sir, the galaxy does not respect us because they do not fear us. They do not fear us because they do not know what we can do. I would like to change that." Dohan opened a secondary communication channel, not to the Vren, not to the station, but to every species that had been coerced into voting for humanity's subjugation. The message was simple, direct, and offered in 63 languages. "This is Admiral Dohan of Earth's Galactic Defense Command. We know your vote was forced. We hold no anger toward you. If you wish to change your vote, you may do so freely. In return, Earth and the Iron Seventh will guarantee your safety against any retaliation from any species, for any reason, for as long as you wish." It was not a threat. It was not a trick. It was an open hand. One small species, then another, then 3 more at once. Within an hour, 19 species had changed their votes. Within 2 hours, the number was 31. The subjugation vote was crumbling, not through force, but through the simple, radical act of offering protection to the frightened. In the Grand Chamber, Okuda watched the vote count shift in real time. His majority was gone. His allies were vanishing. His fleet was outmatched by ships that should not exist, crewed by a species he had called vermin. He pointed at Yuna from across the chamber. "Arrest her. She is a spy. This was planned. She is a military agent." Security forces moved toward the human section. Jisoo stepped in front of Yuna. Several other human delegates stood up. Yuna raised her hand, and they all stopped. She looked at Okuda across the vast space of the chamber, and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "I am not a spy, High Commander. I am the diplomat. You should be worried about the soldiers." On the screens above, the Iron Seventh held its formation in perfect stillness. 49 ships, 7 mountains, 12,000 crew who had spent 15 years preparing for a moment they hoped would never come, and now stood ready for whatever came next. The Vren fleet began to pull back. Not all at once, not obviously, but the outer ships started drifting wider, creating distance, preparing retreat paths. The Vren officers knew what the Vren commanders refused to admit. They were outmatched. Okuda saw it. He saw his own fleet losing its nerve. He saw the vote collapsing. He saw the chamber looking at him differently now. Not with fear, but with the particular expression that beings wear when they watch someone powerful realize they are no longer in control. He turned to Dako one final time. "What is the Iron Seventh?" he asked. His voice was quiet. It was the first time Doko had ever heard the High Commander sound unsure. Doko looked at the screens. He looked at the human ships hanging in the void like mountains made of metal and purpose. He looked at the 3 cruisers still sitting dark and shieldless. He looked at Yuna, standing small and still in the upper tier of the chamber, her folded coat on the chair beside her. It is what humans build when they are done being patient, he said. Okuda did not reply. There was nothing left to say. Every stitch a scar. The subjugation vote was annulled at dawn. The moderator read the revised count to a chamber that had not slept. 44 species had changed their votes. The count now stood at 303 against, 346 for. And with the legal challenge under Statute 9 still active, even the remaining 4 votes carried no weight. The motion was dead. Humanity remained free. There was no celebration. Yuna did not allow it. She told Jisoo and the rest of the human delegation that celebration would look like gloating, and gloating was the first step toward becoming the kind of species that spat on others. Instead, she went to work. For 3 days, while the Iron 7th held its silent position around Station Halcyon, Yuna sat in a small conference room and wrote. She drank tea that Jisoo brought her. She ate rice and soup from the station's food dispensers, which had finally learned how to make human food after 40 years of trying. She slept 4 hours a night on the floor beside her desk, because walking back to her quarters felt like wasted time. She was writing the non-aggression accord. It was a simple document, which was what made it so difficult. Anyone could write a complicated treaty full of threats and conditions and punishment clauses. Yuna wanted something else. She wanted a treaty that did not humiliate the Vren. She wanted a treaty that did not create a new hierarchy with humans on top. She wanted a treaty that simply said clearly and without tricks that every species in the galaxy was equal, not because they were the same, but because they all had the right to exist without someone else deciding their worth. Jisoo read the first draft and frowned. You are being too kind to them. I am being exactly kind enough, Yuna said. They tried to enslave us, and we stopped them. That is enough. Jisoo shook her head, but she did not argue further. She had known Yuna long enough to recognize when her mind was made. On the second day, Hiram arrived at Station Halcyon in person. She was smaller than Yuna had imagined, a young woman with round glasses and ink-stained fingers, who looked more like a university student than an intelligence analyst. But her eyes were quick and sharp, and when she shook Yuna's hand, her grip was firm. You cracked their encryption, Yuna said. It was not as hard as they think, Hiram said with a small, shy smile. It saved us. Hiram looked at the floor. She was not good with praise. I just read the numbers. You and Taeho did the hard part. On the third day, the Iron 7th docked. Taeho came aboard Station Halcyon through the main port, which was the first time a human military commander had ever entered through the front door, instead of the service entrance. He walked through the corridors in a simple uniform, with no medals and no decorations. People stared. Some stepped aside. A few, from species that had changed their votes, nodded at him as he passed. He found Yuna in the human quarters, sitting cross-legged on her bunk with the coat in her lap. She was holding a needle and thread. The repair kit he had sent ahead was open beside her. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Taeho sat down on the opposite bunk and watched her work. She was stitching the acid burn, not removing it, not covering it, but reinforcing the edges so the damage would not spread. The thread she used was dark blue, slightly different from the black wool of the coat. It would be visible. She wanted it to be visible. You did well, Taeho said. You arrived on time, Yuna replied. I always do. They sat in comfortable silence while she stitched. The needle moved in and out of the wool with a steady rhythm. Through the wall, they could hear Jisoo arguing with someone about communication frequencies, and Hiram's quiet voice reading numbers from a datapad. The Holoson maneuver, Yuna said without looking up. 11 seconds. We practiced it for 2 years. And if you had missed, if the pulses had hit their hulls, instead of their shields? Tejo was quiet for a moment. I did not miss. Yuna smiled. It was a small smile, almost invisible. But Tejo saw it because he had been seeing it his whole life. It was their grandmother's smile, the one she wore when she was proud but too stubborn to say so. The non-aggression accord was signed the next day. 47 species co-signed it within the first hour. By the end of the week, the number was over 200. The Vren signed last, after 3 days of internal debate that reportedly involved a great deal of shouting and the breaking of several pieces of furniture. The accord did not punish the Vren. It did not strip them of their fleet or their council seats. It simply placed them on the same level as everyone else. No more subjugation votes. No more forced adoptions. No more spitting on those they considered beneath them. Because the accord stated, in language that Yuna had chosen with great care, that no species was beneath any other. Several ambassadors came to Yuna privately in the days that followed. They were from small species, the kind that had been bullied for centuries, the kind that had learned to bow and scrape and hope they would not be noticed. They told her, quietly and with great emotion, that this was the first time anyone had ever stood between them and the Vren. Not just with weapons, but with words. Not just with power, but with the choice not to use it. One of them, a tiny being with translucent wings and a voice like running water, asked Yuna why humans had not demanded more. You had the fleet, the being said. You could have taken the Vren's seats. You could have taken their territory. You could have become what they were. Yuna thought about this for a moment. Then she said, My grandmother did not stitch this coat, so we could become the thing that tore it. Jisoo was appointed as Earth's new senior communications envoy. She accepted the position with a long speech about duty and honor, and then immediately asked if the envoy's office had a better coffee machine than the communications room. It did. Hiram was promoted to head of Earth's Galactic Intelligence Division. She accepted the position with a nod, a handshake, and a request to go back to her basement office, because the light was better for reading. They let her keep the basement. Dowan officially recommissioned the Iron 7th as Earth's permanent galactic rapid response fleet. The announcement was made quietly, without ceremony, because Dowan believed that the most powerful things in the universe did not need to announce themselves. They simply existed, and everyone knew. On the last night before Yuna left Station Halcyon, she encountered Okuda. He was standing alone in a corridor near the observation deck. He had been stripped of his title by his own people. He was no longer High Commander. He was simply Okuda, large, gray, and standing in a hallway with nowhere to go. The scars on his skin, which he had once worn like medals, now looked like what they really were. Marks left by a life spent fighting. He saw Yuna and went still. She saw him and stopped walking. They stood 10 meters apart in the empty corridor, with the stars turning slowly behind the observation windows. Okuda's eyes moved to the coat, to the acid stain, to the new blue stitches that held the damage together. "Why do you keep it?" he asked. His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "Why did you wear something so old and damaged to a galactic summit?" Yuna looked down at the coat. She ran her hand along the blue stitches, then along the older ones, the white ones from the 1960s, the red ones from the 1980s, the gray ones from the turn of the century. Every stitch, a scar. Every scar, a story. Every story, a refusal to disappear. "Because it reminds me what it costs to survive," she said, "and what it means to choose not to destroy someone, even when you can." Okuda was silent for a very long time. The stars moved behind him. Somewhere far away, the Iron 7th waited in the darkness, patient and quiet and ready. Then Okuda did something that no Vren had ever done to a human being. He bent his massive frame forward, lowered his scarred head, and bowed. Yuna bowed back. Neither of them spoke again, They parted in silence, walking in opposite directions down the corridor, and the stars watched them go. 2 weeks later, Una returned to Earth. She took a train south from the capital. She rode a bus to a small town. She walked up a hillside where the grass was green and the wind blew steady and cool. Her grandmother's grave was simple, a stone marker with a name and 2 dates, and nothing else. Una had always thought it should say more, but her grandmother had been a woman of few words, and perhaps the stone was right to honor that. She folded it one last time, carefully, the way her grandmother had taught her, pressing each fold with the flat of her hand. Then she draped it over the headstone, so that the old wool covered the stone like a blanket. The acid stain faced the sky. The blue stitches caught the light. The coat settled against the stone, as if it had been waiting to come home. Una sat down in the grass beside the grave. She pulled her knees to her chest and looked up at the sky. It was late afternoon, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the east. She could not see the Iron Seventh from here. They were too far away, too high up, invisible against the black. But she knew they were there, 7 mountains, standing guard among the stars. She leaned her head against the cool stone and closed her eyes. The coat shifted slightly, its old stitches whispering against the stone. "They know your name now, Halmoni," she said. The wind carried her words up the hillside and into the sky, where the stars waited, and the ships held their silence, and the coat, burned, stitched, spat upon, and unbroken, rested at last.